Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Christ consciousness. I want to conclude here my research on Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino of the Temple of Set, this strange, unusual, and now passed away person. He's been dead for about 2 years now. And I've kind of got moved into this area through a number of different ways. And of course, there's lots of information I have published on him. You can go and look under the Satanism playlist. And I've reviewed most of his books. I will continue reviewing his books in the future as I feel like it. There isn't much further to learn about him. So I'm going to give you his entire profile. As we know, that's common knowledge. Now, the problem with getting knowledge from friends and buddies and haters is that you can't trust any of it. So it's really a waste of time interviewing people. And people are not interested in being interviewed. They don't want to get their story out there in general, particularly the Michael Aquino supporters, etc., considering the horrific reputation he has and the allegations against him. Now, what do we know about Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, the PSYOPs Special Forces officer? Well, we know quite a bit about him. What we don't know is the fact of what he really was up to. And a lot of it is not his fault. The bottom line is that he's not an army of one. He had a commanding officer who is responsible for him, and we should be grabbing him and saying, well, what went on here? Where was your officer at this time that there's accusations against him? This has never been done. So we get back into the bigger issue of corruption, cover-ups, and of course both sides are wrong here. People are just headhunters looking to go after anybody for basically their own personal egos and for their psychotic belief systems that are just as bad as the psychotic belief systems of the Temple of Set. So what do we know about him? So let's go back to his grandparents. Now, his father came from Italy. His grandfather came from Italy. He went to Seattle initially, getting settled, and then to bring his wife over, which again, this is his grandparents. While his father was in America trying to make room to bring his wife over, his wife was screwing a priest who became a family friend, and whatever happened there. I don't know, did they compare sexual notes? So it's just, the reason I point this out is we're trying to figure out his personality here. So this is how his grandfather looked at things and thought that was perfectly fine and had their warped understanding of the Catholic Church and a priest, and kind of strange that this person would become a family friend of what's going on. So it shows that there's a great lack of morality in the family already. His grandmother was a slut who got involved with corrupt priests, and Daddy thought it was wonderful. Or did they have threesomes? So I don't know. You know, it's not really being sarcastic there. The bottom line is that we have to try and trace things. So let's go on his other side. Now, his mother's maiden name is Ford. Ford is an interesting and old term. Apparently, she goes back in a colonial type history, so it is appeared. You got to remember, he never stated anything fully of what he was involved in. You piece this together from his many books, etc., and that's exactly what he wanted to do. He didn't want to be traced directly for numerous reasons, particularly considering the allegations against him. But he gives a little bit in this book and a little bit in that book, and that's his little game. And I'm assuming he did that so he would sell books as well. So his mother, which apparently came from this old European, what appears to be English, German-type family, had money, it appears. And she herself made quite a bit of money, and we're not sure where that came from as well. But we'll talk to that. But that's where her parents, and apparently she came from money, his mother. We don't know anything about his grandmother on his side there, or his grandfather. We do know, and we know little about his grandparents on his father's side, other than what I just gave you, who apparently were two Italians who came from Italy. So the whole idea is that that's the story there. Now, his mother's family, we don't have any information on other than piecing some of the pieces together. Let's talk about his father. Now, again, his father, which is first-generation Italian, pretty much served in World War II, so it is alleged, in the Third Army of General George S. Patton. As a armored car driver. He was not in the tanks. He was not a tank commander in tanks, so it states there. We're not entirely sure, but if it was something within actual tanks, which Patton is known for, he would have stated that. So what it states there, he also got a Purple Heart, his father, and was in an armored car. I guess a support of the tanks to some degree is what it's stating. So he did fight in World War II and served there for a few years, etc. So, and this has been stated there. And Aquino originally wanted to go into the armored division and actually join there, and then jumped out of it thinking that he wouldn't see enough action, that you are very limited. And of course you are. You get in an armored division and you have to be next to your armored stuff, and you're not going to be doing all that much, I'm assuming. So that was his excuse. But we'll get into his military careers soon after that. Now, it states that his father was an investment broker. We don't know what all this means. We're thinking that that relates to, but he didn't state it that way, and he should have. Certainly has enough command of the language to say that. We're thinking a kind of stockbroker, but he was into investments, whatever that means. We just don't know what that means. We don't know where the money came from. We're not sure if he was all that successful. It appeared that his mother was involved in and had money. This is all assumptions. We're not entirely sure. And again, do I need somebody else's opinion? Well, anybody who wants to add to this, I'm more than happy to put it in the comments below. But it's not very important in the bigger picture. Now, his mother was a very interesting and strange and bizarre woman. She was a typical kind of low-level artistic genius. But it's more than just art. But when people have this kind of reality, they are weird people. So she was the youngest person to ever go through Stanford, a very private and expensive school. She went through Stanford starting at the age of 14 and graduated in 3 years. She was the first person to ever do that, being so young. So Stanford certainly is not a junior college. It's not an easy college. It's a very difficult college, and she was able to do that. But it doesn't appear she did anything with that degree that she got, and how she got in and who paid for it. Well, we just don't know. These are all the things that are kind of interesting because Stanford's very expensive. But maybe because she was a genius, she got in for free. But it appears there's some money here. She then spent time in artistic circles, but we don't have anything other than some very badly written poems by her that Aquino has published in one of his books. I mean, it's just poetry. Who can't write that stuff? It doesn't show talent. So the whole idea is that, but supposedly she was an artist, a sculptor, etc. She went in the 1930s to Berlin, which is strange in itself, to study art, sculpture, whatever there. So why would you do that? First of all, if you're rich, you go to Paris, maybe London. Why would you go to Berlin? This tends to think that she had some sort of German contact, that she probably spoke German, and her family is connected there. We also have to understand that the Ford family, including the Fords who made the automobiles, he was an out-and-out supporter of Hitler and Nazis and had factories and everything else over there. So this is exactly, the connection here is kind of interesting, since Aquino has this fascination and great, great love for the Nazis in particular. Not the Germans, the Nazis. So let's make sure we understand that as well. So Mommy seemed to have some connection there as well, and maybe the entire family had connections there as well. It's just interesting that at a really horrible time in the 1930s that she would be going over to Berlin and studying there for some particular reason that we're not sure of. As I said, there's a lot of places to go, and who has the money to do that? How did they do that? Why did she go over there? This is all part of the bigger picture that we have to look at in terms of trying to figure out who the family is. His mother would become a priestess in the Temple of Set, and I don't know if she ran her own little group or not. We don't know, but she certainly was officiated into that organization at the highest level. So the bottom line is that she was a great supporter of his. Nothing is mentioned about his father, and apparently his father probably died young, most likely of cancer. His mother died fairly young of cancer as well. So there's cancer in his family, which he again would die of himself. So we need to look at that as kind of a background. Who was she? What did she do? Well, she was a very odd, strange, artistic person who embraced the Temple of Set and Satanism as presented by them. So I don't know if she was involved in the Church of Satan like Aquino was or not. There's no mention to that, but she did become a priestess of the Temple of Set. Important to understand that. To piece together things here. Why someone would do the strange, unusual things that he did, and the allegations against him are, very prolific. What are we to make of this? Was he a strange person with a horrible family background? Well, we're trying to find all that out. Now, Aquino has never talked about his childhood in terms of how he actually grew up, the problems he had, his relationship. He talks very nicely about his father in terms of whom he was in certain comments, and obviously his mother, who lived with him till her death. They shared their house in San Francisco together, and we'll go into that family unit as well. Now, it appears he didn't have any brothers and sisters. We're not entirely sure of that, and we'll have to, but it doesn't appear that there's there. But you got to remember, this is a guy who everybody wants to kill, who's involved in Satanism, who's been harassed and everything else, even though it's kind of oddly, he's lived in the same house his entire life in San Francisco. Very easy to locate. Well, I guess he figures, what's the point of hiding? They're going to find me anyway. And that house, I'm assuming, was owned by his mother, and he could live there for free, and eventually he inherited that. So what do we have as a background here? We don't know if his mother worked or not. She did leave him a bunch of money, but did that money come from Daddy? Was it from Daddy's investments that he left to his wife, which is required in California state law? Or did she make the investments herself? You must remember they had some property that they bought. This is where the money apparently came from. She left $3 million to Michael Aquino, apparently her only son. And these were real estate holdings and other things, which, of course, if you were smart back then, like most smart people, particularly if someone was an investment broker like Daddy, is you bought lots of real estate. And real estate tripled and quadrupled in California through the period of time we're talking about here. It was always expensive up in San Francisco and other areas, but that even went higher as the great real estate boom, which hit through the 80s into the 90s and beyond. So we're not sure where all that came from, but needless to say, it has been stated in many cases that he inherited this $3 million, $3 to $5 million. I'm not sure the exact number, and it doesn't really matter. He got millions. So he also, of course, was a officer of high ranking, and they're paid well. So it's not like this guy had to worry about money any time of his life, so it appears. As I said, I'm going to keep my commentaries down here and kind of just give the facts, kind of a profile of him. So that's his parents there. It appears he doesn't have any brothers and sisters. He was born October 16th, 1945 in San Francisco. And apparently the family is connected there. The father was there, etc. And again, she apparently may be from what's considered wealthy San Franciscans. And of course, she apparently made money. So she's very, very smart. She went through college quickly. Was very artistic. I'm assuming that with the real estate boom in San Francisco, Santa Barbara area, that he would, the family cashed in on that, and that's where the money came from. He doesn't talk about having a lot of money, even though he talks about buying luxury cars. You're talking Ferraris and other things that required you to have some money. He claims he couldn't afford more than one of these, etc. So I'm not sure how true all that is. He seems like he was living very high on the hog, not having to pay huge rents, living in ultimately within San Francisco in a house that probably he owned or mommy owned. We don't know. So in terms of the family, that's what we look at. So we have to say that he came from a very upper middle class to wealthy family. That's what is pretty well documented. Now, San Francisco is where he ended up with his mother, where she came from, but he grew up in the rich neighborhood of Santa Barbara. And again, we don't know what Daddy actually was doing or she was doing. But Santa Barbara is pretty much Beverly Hills by the ocean. It's known to be very expensive forever. It's known to have pretty much an affluent, stuck-up group of people that are kind of see themselves as back Easterners, rich people, or the original Californians that have been there for a long time who made a lot of money. Now, what's interesting about all this, and one of the reasons why I find Aquino a little bit interesting, is that, well, I lived in Santa Barbara for 3 years. I went to the University of California at Santa Barbara for a period of time, and the local city college there. So the whole idea is that I know the area, I know what Santa Barbara is about, I know what the school he went to. He went to the University of California at Santa Barbara. He got his M.A. in 1968, and he got his Ph.D. there in 1976. So this is way before I went there, in the early 80s. So, but Santa Barbara is a unique, very beachy town. It has that beachy type things. You're talking surfers, volleyball, this kind of hippy-dippy kind of attitudes. University of Santa Barbara is known for that, which is in Isla Vista, which is where the actual university is located. They have a big place where all the students stay there. And it's known as a place where it's beach. It's a very beautiful college that borders onto the ocean, and it's very much of that kind of attitude there. It's very much of a beach attitude. So you wouldn't think that would, an easygoing, kickback type of life, you wouldn't think that this would be something that appealed to him that much, and it really didn't. He doesn't talk about his school times. He does talk about other things, which we'll get into. With other things. So this is exactly where he grew up. So the whole idea is he's not living in a place that has a problem, that there is a terrible neighborhood, that somehow he was traumatized. There seems to be no family problems. He doesn't talk about any abuse. He seems to be close to his mother, who lived many, many years after his father. As he said, she got involved with the Temple of Set and became a priestess in it. So all of this bodes the fact that he had a close relationship with his mother, and we don't know what the father, but he speaks of his father well in the different comments he makes through the different interviews. And I listened to every public interview that he's ever given to kind of figure out his personality, if that's possible. You got to remember that he is a psychological warfare expert, and he wants to come out in a particular way, and he does. Whom he is, I know, but the whole idea is thinking that this guy is some psychopath because he lived a horrible life, like someone like Charles Manson did, who was abused all of his life, thrown around as a kid, and got involved with a lot of people. Well, it didn't, and apparently he had enough of a stable life to go through the Boy Scouts to the point of becoming an Eagle Scout, and went to the Honor Society there and became a national commander, which is so typical of how he operates. Now, this is also a time when the military and everything else was looked down upon, and particularly in places like Santa Barbara, which are considered the hippy-dippy areas, where they had big protests and everything else. So him becoming an ROTC on the campus of UC Santa Barbara is a very antisocial thing, and it would be something that you would not be able to use to your advantage. People looked at you as scum, and certainly you were not going to meet any girls or anything else being in the ROTC. Nobody wanted to know you. This is right during and shortly after the Vietnam War, where people are looking to get away from anything military. Now, what that shows us is very so if you think that becoming part of the Church of Satan was antisocial, well, becoming in the military in hippy-dippy land was super antisocial, so it shows that that's the kind of person he was. Secondly, most people don't look at the Boy Scouts as something of any great value, particularly in the hippy-dippy times. Again, this is a very conservative organization. Basically, the Boy Scouts were started by a Nazi. The whole idea is that, and to go through it to become an Eagle Scout, yeah, me makey fire. Is that like surviving in the surfboard world, man? So the whole idea is that it doesn't make sense. But it shows you a person who's very antisocial, goes against it. I doubt if he had very many friends when he was young. Certainly what he's doing doesn't show it. He doesn't talk about going to the beach. He doesn't talk about surfing. He doesn't talk about volleyball. He doesn't talk about hanging out on the beach and enjoying the waves. None of this. But he doesn't talk about his childhood at all. But, you know, here's a guy that's in the Boy Scouts living right on the beach there. So he doesn't say I'm a great surfer, I'm a great volleyball, nothing, because he didn't. He didn't do that. He went and rubbed sticks together with a group of, basically the Boy Scouts are all the kind of backward right-wing nut jobs that would go into the military. So that, of course, fits as well. And generally, it's considered antisocial behavior at this time. Nobody was going into the Eagle Scouts wearing those goofy little shorts and bandanas, and it was taken very seriously, while everybody else was tripping out on drugs and talking about politics and so forth, particularly in that area. And of course, he lived in a wealthy house in Santa Barbara, so he wasn't living in the student communities or much happening there. He also claims that he's only had sex with 2 people in his life, and that is his first wife and his second wife. So, yet he claimed he stayed at UC Santa Barbara because they had girls in a better environment and didn't want to go to West Point. Well, that doesn't add up either. He had no problem wearing goofy little queer outfits, which of course he loves dressing up. That's part of what he does. He's a fantasist. We'll get into that as well later. So I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible, but there's a lot to cover. So this is what's happened to him. So he did not only become an Eagle Scout, he went to the top and became a leader in it at a time, of course, when nobody was in there. I'm assuming the attendance and everything else was very small at that time. So someone like him was glorified. And, of course, that's exactly what, you know, just like the military. Get your little badge, wear your little uniform, look like a stooge, and learn stuff that is worthless. So the whole idea is that this is his background. But he doesn't talk about any of this. He doesn't even talk about foods he likes or anything else. He talks about, apparently, cars, and his autobiography takes him through life through his cars, and which tells you very little to no information on him or anything else. And, of course, the same thing with his parents and his basically childhood. It can be assumed, since there's no negativity about it, that his actual home life and what was going on there was something that was not in any way a particular problem with him. So he wasn't abused. He didn't have a terrible family. His family was not divorced. He was not living with a single mother. His mother followed him into his career and lived with him to the day she died. So it shows that they had a very close type relationship in this entire reality. So we're trying to get why did he want to do so many antisocial things? He started with, and you may not think it's antisocial, but I know that generation. I know what was going on then. So the point is that certainly it was antisocial, and I'm not sure there was great support in liberal Santa Barbara either. But Santa Barbara is also just kind of the city. There are very wealthy neighborhoods surrounding it, Montecito, and other areas that Hope Ranch and all these other things. And of course, an hour or so north is where Ronald Reagan had his ranch and where Michael Jackson had his in Santa Ynez. So it's up that way. So it's all in this area here. But Santa Barbara is known for its 90 minutes away from Los Angeles and a weekend getaway for a lot of people from Los Angeles. It's a tourist town, lots of hotels and other things. There's really no industry there at all, so you have that particular problem. So you have the real poor people that live in the few bad neighborhoods, and then you have the rich people that live in mansions around there, and a few in between. It always was super difficult to live there and expensive, so whatever Daddy was doing, he was making good money, and it doesn't seem to be any mention of any kind of financial problems. And as I said, it appears that Mommy came from money as well. So we just don't know. and how they ended up. Now, he was born in San Francisco, so was his mother. And I'm not sure where the father was from exactly, but they moved down to Santa Barbara and stayed there through most of his life. So that's where he grew up. Couldn't be a less threatening area, couldn't be a more party area, couldn't be a more kickback. And of course, you're in an idyllic system. You could kind of consider Santa Barbara as living in like Hawaii. So the whole idea is that's the kind of environment that he grew up in. So it couldn't have been. So how he got into the actual Boy Scouts and found that interesting, I don't know. Maybe Daddy was one, we don't know. But that's antisocial when you're doing that in the 60s and 70s. Then, of course, he liked his little easygoing, beautiful weather, everything else, and decided to go into the, of course, a natural progression from going into the kind of rigid Nazi-based organization that the Boy Scouts are. He then went into ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, I guess it stands for. So the whole idea is, again, I'm even kind of surprised Santa Barbara had that as part of their curriculum. Because certainly these are places where they had big protests and problems and nobody liked the military. You got to remember the military was pretty much hated throughout the 70s and 80s because of the Vietnam debacle that went on, which of course wasn't any of the troops' fault. You know, as we know, it's the ignorant, horrible command training system that the United States has and the idiots that get in there. And of course, Aquino is now become one of them. So he looked at things of what he wanted to do. So Aquino never went through the official military training from what I can see. Now, he didn't go to he went through some training, but he didn't go to traditional boot camp. I'm not sure, ROTC spent a few weeks, I don't know, in the military. I'm not sure how all that works. The military has a very strict way of doing things, and I don't think that's changed that much, but it may have been very different in the 70s. And things were generally liberalized then because they couldn't get anybody to join the military. So, and if you were a military thinking person, you were a freak and nobody wanted to know you. And certainly that didn't get you lots of dates. So he appears not to have very many relationships, so it appears, and I don't think he was a popular kid on campus. And of course, he doesn't state that. As he said, he doesn't state that he was, I don't think he stated he was in any kind of fraternity, that he was partying, drinking, so typical of what you do, particularly at a beach college and all the sexual adventures you had. None of this is talked about. And as he said, he does state that he's only had sex with 2 women in his life, even though there's a book written by a woman who says she had an affair with him. But that's typical Aquino. We can't really believe anything. He's giving us a Disneyland picture of a guy who's very antisocial. First the Boy Scouts, then the military, and then to top all that, it wasn't antisocial enough for him. He has to join the Church of Satan and then start his own organization because he didn't want to follow somebody else's religions. And really, that's what it comes down to. We'll get into that as well. Again, he's always going the opposite no matter what he's in and why he's seeking. Now, you generally see conflict because you either have a high understanding of things or, of course, you want to run the show, and I think the last goes with him. So he did get his PhD from Santa Barbara and spent his time studying there. And, of course, he claims, and he writes this in one of his books, that he had a choice to go to West Point or go to Santa Barbara College. Now, if I was a constipated, tight-ass guy who was the Eagle Scout, and went to the highest level, then I would certainly want to be the macho motherfucker who wants to go to West Point. I mean, after all, is that where all the men are made? So what do? You sit around a table with all the West Pointers? Yeah, I went to West Point, boy. I know what being trained like a military officer. Hey, you get that, boy? Where did you go, Colonel Aquino? I went to Santa Barbara. In between carrying my rifle, I went to the beach and surfed. So the bottom line is that this is the kind of, I find again this to be very interesting, but very typical of Aquino, not really wanting to get into the system and deal with things at a higher level, feeling he would be rejected. Aquino kind of looks strange. He looks strange as a younger man. Many people think he looks very effeminate. And it's very strange there because he kind of does. He's kind of a weird looking guy when he was younger. So very strange. But he also has very strange beliefs with everything that goes with him. And part of his military idolization is the idolization, as is typical in a lot of the military, of his idolization of Nazis. Not Germans, not Romans, not anyone else, considering his history. But apparently his mother was tied to Germany while his father was more Italian. I don't know, but there's something there. But something's going on there. But he found this to be something of great value. And there's a problem with the military because a lot of them think like this. And I guess that's why we can consider the U.S. military, which has never won a war. So they emulate and want to be part of another society who's never won another war. Kind of strange to have these people and to think that. And his hero, Heinrich Himmler, who was a failed chicken farmer, stoogey-looking jerk, he thinks is some genius because he did some goofball little rituals that he considered of value. Yet he certainly didn't start an organization named Himmler's Dozen. He made sure he did something that he could manipulate people again with by using the Temple of Set based in quote, Aryans. Of course, Aryans are Iranians, so I guess he's kind of close with the Egyptian stuff there. Because that's where Aryans come from, the Middle East. So the whole idea is that he didn't start that because he knew he couldn't really sell that. But secondly, everything that he did, again, he has no imagination whatsoever. The so-called Nazi magic was started by Anton LaVey, the Trapezoid Order. He took that, as well as the Vampire Order, when he usurped the command as a traitorous officer in the Church of Satan. He started an organization and took all the people with him. So he took, or at least some of the people there who wanted to be big jerks. And I don't know if he bought them off or what he told them or not, but they wanted to play serious, and Anton LaVey wasn't really that serious in the end there. It was more philosophical, it was more play, and they wanted to worship gods. So, and of course that was one of the problems there. We'll get into that in a few minutes here as well. So the fact that he turned down West Point, he did need somebody to appoint him as an officer, all that little gooby went on. But he ended up going through ROTC training at Santa Barbara instead of going to West Point, which I find comical. So, but you have to say, if he was so militaristic, why didn't he go to the world-renowned West Point and be a person who could say, well, I graduated from him. Also, the cadets have cool uniforms that I think would have attracted him more than the surfer shorts and the T-shirt. You get it says USB, man, UCSB. So the whole idea is that I don't quite understand that, but I think that shows an entire reality there. And as he said, he's a reserve officer training. He never was anything else. He wasn't considered military as traditional. He was always in the reserves, which is a loophole in the military, which apparently you can go full-time for there. And of course the reserves are always brought into full-time, but they don't go through the military rigmarole. So they have much less standards, so they have a reserve. If you have very high military standards and people are put through the rigmarole while they have to live at home, well, the reserves would never work. So let's remember that he's doing this kind of half-ass and very protective. Staying home with mommy, enjoying the beach life in a rich neighborhood while playing soldier. Very interesting. So, of course, this would come to an end as well. We have to understand that this is not. But Aquino in himself is not this bastion of macho courage that a lot of people think a military man is. Listening to him, he shied away from all that. So he originally wanted to go into, as I said, the tank corps. He found out that that would be something that would kind of keep him rooted. I think maybe he woke up, being in the armored division because you think it's fun because of a goofball lying movie about Patton, is kind of a stupid thing to do. You have to, the tank corps, you never leave your tank. It's a horrible thing to be in, and I don't think there's any glamour in it at all. So, and certainly you're stuck in one area Well, if you get into other areas. Now, he got into, so I'm not going to go over all his military, etc. If you want to go through all that stuff, it's all listed in other interviews in terms of what he did or not. But, so he went through this. He became an officer in the reserve, which then he went to, quote, got his contract for full-time work with the military. And that's how it works. You get little contracts for full-time work, and we'll go into that a little bit in here as well. But so from there, once he joined the military in 1970 or 69, I'm not sure the exact date. Again, the dates aren't really very important here. He did go to Vietnam. Now, let's understand what it is. He is a career officer specializing in psychological warfare. Now, this is part of the intelligence community. But psychological warfare is, I'm not sure, again, it depends on how it's applied. It depends on where you're at. It's very, very complicated. Psychological warfare really is a form of intelligence, but not really. Psychological warfare generally is just that. You're supposed to do things that affects the... You write booklets, you drop pamphlets on the enemy, telling them to surrender, telling them they're to give up, they can't win. This is what psychological warfare is, as far as I understand it, is. How it's applied in the U.S. military is very strange. I'm not sure there is a procedure for that, but there are groups of people that work together in this. And why you'd be doing psychological warfare from San Francisco, the Presidio, I don't quite understand. Now, what do you do when there's no war on? Where's the psychological warfare of it all? So I don't know. It blends into intelligence, and apparently he claims that he worked for almost all the intelligence agencies out there, the CIA, the DIA. He claims not to work for the NSA, and they were kind of weird. I don't believe that either. It could be, I mean, aren't they all together? But they're not. You know, they're competitive little groups as well as working together. So he did go to Vietnam and spent a year there, apparently, as a psychological officer. He claims, going from different countries, that he was all around Vietnam. That's all we know about it. He doesn't state any psychological warfare techniques he's done but one, and I'll get into that in a minute. But he claimed he went to Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and I don't know if it was Thailand, whatever it was, all the countries that are there, which was kind of this domino effect of countries that were involved in the, quote, Vietnam War. And he claims that he was in, well, we know he was on the ground there near military active areas. He also claims that he did have military action where he actually was in firefights shooting at each other as well. And I don't know why a psychological warfare expert would be doing that. And of course, I'm not sure what his duties were in general. We can't, we don't know unless he states, because I'm not sure anything in the military is that simple when you get into intelligence and psychological warfare. What do they do? Where do they do it, etc.? We don't know. But he did spend a year there. He did see action and was feared for his life, as he has stated in his books, because he took care of his business thinking that he very possibly could be killed over there, and this seemed to have a great amount of fear with him. Now, the whole idea is that he doesn't seem to be a tough, kick-ass kind of guy. He can move into that when he wants to, but he doesn't seem that. He claims that one of his first missions in Vietnam, where he parachuted in someplace with groups of others and hit a field, and they ran down the field, taking this particular area. I'm not sure how much firefighting went on there. At the end of it, he threw up, which is, you know, people think they're heroes. They're not. I mean, the two things you do a lot in you're initially in battle, and particularly when your first encounters, is you throw up and you poop your pants. This is very common, anybody who's been in real combat. So this is common. It's not cowardice or anything else. So, but that's what he claims. So he's not trying, you know, it's amazing how he likes to say how weak he is in some areas and strong in the other. This may be part of his psychological warfare. He likes to come off almost like granddaddy. And he talks like this very bland person, you know. He talks particularly when it comes to sexuality of how a prude he was, how he's only had sex with 2 women. We pretty much know that's a lie as well. So, and if he's having affairs with other women, so is claimed by Linda Blood in her book, most likely that was not the first and that was not the last. We just don't know what's going on there. But I find it hard to believe that he is the Eagle Scout in the rest of his life as well. Once you get into the military and you start killing people, everything goes out the door with that. So we just don't know. But he claims to be a prude, yet he joined an organization known for its orgies and naked women altars, and that was the big appeal of it. He claims not. So when we move into that, we have to understand what the other aspects is going on here of what he is doing. So he did go to Vietnam, so he did see action. He put his life on the line, so it is alleged. He was out in the bush. He talks about this in terms of the truck that he used to drive and everything with it. So all this stuff was part of it, and he seems to make some comments of how he survived, etc., by being friendly to the villagers and, of course, driving them around a lot, which they appreciated. Because nobody wants to walk, particularly in that heat and everything else. So he used to pick up a lot of people all the time. This was one way of the villagers saying, "Hey, we want to make sure this guy lives because we need the rides." So he's kind of the American bus service there, which makes sense, and it shows you that he's thinking and is giving you a little higher reality of what's going on. So I think that's very important to understand as well and part of the process here. So from when he came back from Vietnam, then we start getting into different areas. He's, of course, been stationed at many different bases, as the military are, from Louisiana to, I think, he does have a rating of being Special Forces. Now, Special Forces is commonly known in the Army as the Green Berets. There's also the Rangers, which he was not a Ranger. He didn't complete Ranger School, but he did complete the Green Berets, and he even states that every Green Beret that's issued has a number in it, and he gives his number to kind of tell people, if it's real, to prove that he was a Green Beret. And completing the physical reality of becoming a Green Beret is quite extensive. So, 100 to go to become Green Berets, only 3 of them passed the test. It's one of those things that's difficult to do. Now, I don't know if he got officer special treatment or not. You got to remember that once you're an officer in the military, you're pretty much a god, and they push you through. They do special things so you can get your badges. Like people want their parachuting badge in combat, so they'll take you out in some place that's 100% safe, and you do your parachuting there, and then you get your badge. So that's how they work in the military, because it's all about getting your badges, which you kind of learned as an Eagle Scout, which is almost identical to the military in a lot of ways in terms of how you get rank, how you get badges, etc. And of course he was into this. He claims to tell you his personality, that he's a combination of Mad Magazine and Horror Magazine. That's how he classifies his personality. So it's these two. He thinks he's a little joker, and he likes the dark aspects of vampires and fantasy with that. And most of that's fantasy. It's interesting that you would say horror magazines, because he was fascinated, like a lot of people are, by the horror pictures, the Frankensteins, the vampires, and all that goes with that. He's very much of a fantasist. He loves to wear costumes and uniforms. That's all part of what he's done. He's been seen by several people who've contacted me in the Fisherman Wharf area wearing Dracula capes and stuff, because he likes that. He always walks around in this Dracula-type outfit with a goofy haircut, wearing the stuff. And you can get away with that in San Francisco, which is the reason why he went from Santa Barbara, where if you do that in Santa Barbara, you're going to probably run into problems, and you're going to certainly be labeled a freak. You just don't do that in Santa Barbara. It's all beachy, Ocean Pacific wearing clothes, shorts, T-shirts. This is what, there's a uniform for the beach crowd in Southern California. So Northern California is completely different. So he could act pretty weird in San Francisco and get away with it. Nobody would care. And he was known to do this. He's a big fantasist. He loves fantasy and dressing up. And of course, in your military, you're playing fantasy all the time. So the whole idea is he was doing that. He came back with this psychological, and here we get into all the different things. Apparently, there's nothing in his military record that shows that he was doing anything improper, that he was a disciplinary problem. He went through many military schools, got high honors. In the military, he wrote for General George S. Patton Jr., General Patton's son. He wrote speeches for him. So, there is a lot of piecing together what he was doing in the military and where. So he did that, and it shows that, and I don't know how that fits in with psychological warfare. Again, he's writing speeches for people. Is that part of psychological warfare? What, warfare on your own troops? So apparently he was, and how does that fit into intelligence? I wonder why he would be doing that. I'm not sure that we can tell in any way if anything he tells us is true either. I mean, there's a fantasy aspect to what he tells and how he wants to romanticize everything that is totally, completely unprovable. He also states everybody loves him. My good friend, he likes to state. And, of course, Patton Jr. loved him because he wrote him scripts, and apparently Patton Jr., like Daddy, was a little bit of a retard and couldn't get anything out of his mouth. So the whole idea is that they brought in the silver-tongued, very studious kind of strange guy, which is Michael Aquino. Now, when he went to the Presidio, of course, then he started to have this, after coming back from Vietnam, he got this interest in the Church of Satan. I forget how he said he ran into them, but he heard about them or saw them on the street as well. And was attracted to this. Now, here you are, a military officer in San Francisco, because we got to, time is important too. You're talking about the middle to late 60s. Everybody was stoned, everybody was humping, everybody was a revolutionary. But this is a guy walking around who wants to do something different. He's walking around in a military officer's uniform. Now, a lot of people misunderstand the conservative factor about the military as well. I mean, they're known for their drunken whoring. That's what most military people do. So, and if you want to think they have any kind of morality or honor, well, that's good for a Marine Corps commercial, but it has nothing to do with reality. So they're generally people that are all mentally messed up. They're in weird ways, etc. But the bottom line is that Aquino somehow, being a military officer, went and joined the Church of Satan. Now, the reason he claims it is he felt that Anton LaVey was a genius, that he stated things correctly, there was no masking, that you take responsibility for your own life, you have no excuses, you have no God to ask for forgiveness of or anything else, that this was what he was attracted to, that was 100% honest. So, he wasn't attracted to the drugs. Apparently, he doesn't drink or smoke or take any drugs, so he has stated. And apparently has a minor interest in sexuality. Now, he went to a place where drugs, sex, and rock and roll are the primary thing, that this is a hedonistic way of looking at things, and that you should understand the fact that this is part of you and indulge in it, not reject it, because that doesn't help. Yet that is not the Boy Scout or the military philosophy and things. So, but he apparently found that very appealing. And you're talking about a very loose sexual environment with naked people on the altars, and it is considered that there was also, and he didn't participate, that there were orgies going on, the fact that people would wear masks and have sex with the human altar. And apparently his wife Lilith was one of those altars at one time. Now, we don't know if this was a whole group of orgies there or not, and if everybody was having sex with the actual altar. We do know that Anton LaVey's daughter, Zena, got pregnant at 13, and we just don't understand by whom or where. But certainly there was an awful lot of sexuality going on, and his first wife, Anton LaVey, was 15. So there's a lot of this short eyes going on there in general, and of course that's what they believed in. In the 60s, that was fairly fair game. Young women was thought of as okay. In this day and age, it's considered a horrible crime. But it wasn't back then, and to any great degree, and it was, while there were laws, it wasn't enforced. But this is what Aquino's getting involved in. And of course, Aquino, being the studious kind of sitting at the back of the room writing notes down kind of guy, was assigned to write the worst thing that everybody hates in an organization, the newsletter for the organization. Nobody wants to do it. It's boring. It's a waste of time. So he was assigned that, and everybody was happy to push it on him, and he would do it. He also did like any good Boy Scouts or little military college guy does. He studied and went up the ranks because that's what he's done all his life. Now, he must have got that from his parents somehow. I just don't get it. But he did it with the Eagle Scouts, which is basically the Boy Scouts. You go into the Eagle Scouts, and you just work your way up by getting all these badges. You do the same thing in the military. You get a badge for everything. And, of course, he took the same attitude with the Church of Satan, going through the ranks there. And he was the highest ranking. Nobody else really wanted to complete any of this stupid, boring tests except him. And so to shut him up and to keep him working, they moved him up there, and he considered the whole attitude here to be perfect. Well, this is not true. Now, and he keeps trying to blame Anton LaVey for selling out. Now, in terms of trying to make money off the Church of Satan, he didn't have $5 million or $3 million in the bank from Mommy, even though he was living rent-free and had a free house from Mommy, which was probably worth $300,000 in San Francisco at that time. So the whole idea is that he was living a subsidized life thanks to Mommy and Daddy, who gave him a house in San Francisco, otherwise known as the Black House, because it was painted black. So there was a boosting there, but he didn't have much of an income, unlike Aquino, who's making good money as a military officer, as well as getting money from Mommy, either directly or indirectly, and eventually being left millions of dollars. So we have to keep all of that in mind as well. But Aquino blames that he sold out because he was going to allow people, and I read the actual Church of Satan rebuttal to what Aquino said. And it's very informative. I can't seem to find that page again, but it's very informative of exactly what was going on there and how interesting it is. And that is the fact of, yes, Anton LaVey wanted to reward successful people with titles. And this makes 100% sense. This isn't about selling degrees. So if you're a person who has achieved a high level, very successful in business or education, well, do you want them, okay, go sit next to Ronnie over there who can barely spell his name and has achieved nothing in life, and you can learn with everybody else. Well, nobody wants to do that. It's insulting to the person who has achieved something. So what you want to do is give these people a certain degree of, and I did this in my college for a while. I said, look, if you've written a couple books and courses and you have established something, well, you can get a degree at no cost. You get an honorary degree because you have shown that you know what you're talking about and that you've achieved something. So it makes sense. That's what Anton LaVey wanted to do. And, of course, there would be some money tied in there because the church was a big flop. It never made much money. The membership was kind of a joke. It was $13. I don't know, was that forever or was that a year? But it doesn't matter. $13, even if you have a whole bunch of people, which they never really had, is not enough money to live on and generate. So he couldn't make any money. The sales of his books were fairly high, but he made peanuts on them. These are paperbacks that sold for a couple of bucks. What do you think they got from that? 20 cents a book? So even if you sold 10 million of those, you wouldn't make much money. Anton LaVey, at the time of his divorce, said he was making about $22,000 a year, which was even below average for then. So there wasn't a lot of money coming in there, period. So something needed to be done, and he saw Michael Aquino as a time to usurp the general and take over, and that's exactly what he did. So it wasn't selling anything. And frankly, if you're running an organization, and if you're running a satanic organization, rewarding people for success and charging them money for it makes sense. Everybody does this. So the whole idea is, and nor should you require that. Some countries require people to retrain themselves if they're doctors and lawyers and other things. Well, I mean, this sets up to a real serious problem. Credit has to be given for people knowing things and them not starting at the bottom. And when you do that, it becomes a horrible failure. There are people all over Europe that are selling flowers on the streets that have medical degrees from other countries that are certainly valid. So as we understand all of these things, this is what happened. Now, there were other problems there. The Church of Satan under Anton LaVey wasn't very pleased with Michael Aquino's attitude in general. He kept wanting to have gods and praying to them, while Anton said, this is a philosophy. This has nothing. We don't believe in silly gods or anything else. What we believe in is the philosophy of casting away the hypocrites realities of Christianity and what they're teaching, and giving people to understand to enjoy and embrace money, sex, and power, because that's what people do anyway, and we're just honest about it. We're not going to hide behind a cross or a Bible. We're going to have our own. So that's what that's what Anton LaVey stated. Michael Aquino wanted a God to pray to. He wanted something supernatural that he conveniently made contact with, to say that he was the channel for this and that he was going to do that. So the attitude was that he wanted to make this a religion. From day one, the Church of Satan was not to become a religion. They didn't want that, period. There wasn't any God forms that were there, and they believed that to be silly and stupid. Aquino kept saying he was talking to entities and everything else. He kept writing these in the newsletter, which nobody really liked and disagreed. Now, he was tolerated to a certain degree because of the fact that he was writing the newsletter that nobody else wanted to do. This became a problem because people's getting to more and more conflict. Here again, Michael Aquino states that Anton LaVey was the greatest guy and nobody will criticize him in front of me. No, you did all that, didn't you, Michael? Michael turned on his own people. He didn't work within the organization. He didn't try and help it make more money. He didn't talk with Anton LaVey. He saw this as a time to usurp and traitor and break things up, showing again his personality, which per the military and per the Eagle Scouts would be an atrocious thing to do. So it's like getting at the top of the Eagle Scouts and then saying, well, I'm going to make my own badges. Well, he didn't do any of this stuff. Nor did he do anything in the military to any great extent. He went to a bunch of schools and got his little certificates, which he's good at. You know, he spent a lot of time in school. He learned how to pass tests. He learned how to write the gobbledygook crap that these schools want, and was able to do that. Now, with Anton LaVey, you know, he'd been there for almost 10 years when it broke up. There was no place to go, and he saw nothing happening there. And there was no. At this time, he was now married to Lilith, the head of the vampires part of the Church of Satan. He had buddies, the Trapezoid Order, the Nazi magic that was part of the Church of Satan. Again, nothing that he did. So the whole idea is he all of a sudden channeled something in one night and wrote down this book that he talked with Satan, who claimed that his real name was Set. How convenient. He did try and open up his own Church of Satan, but there were copyright conflicts there. So it really wasn't the fact that Satan was really known as Set. He just couldn't legally do that. Of course, if he manipulated it a wee bit, he could have. That's why we have the Temple of Satan and other things they have today. But apparently he didn't want to play that game and get in conflict with it. He wanted something a little different so he didn't run right into Christianity. You know, the minute you start talking Satan, you run into serious problems, as would happen with the Process Church. You started using Satan and Lucifer, and basically it was a Christian group that is labeled Satanists because they talked about Satan and Lucifer. So he wanted to move away from that blockage as well, thinking in his pea brain that he could bring a lot of people in because this was a philosophical and religious system that made sense. So this is where he's coming from. But Anton LaVey didn't make any money. It was not a success. It didn't do well. And basically, after an initial little explosion, how many members did they have? They had several hundred members, 300, 400, 500 members. Most of those were $13 a year members. There wasn't much of anything. It's just all these. Just like the Temple of Set internationally, maybe there's 500 of them if you're lucky. So the whole idea is that he saw this as a time to pull out of this kind of comic book reality, this fun reality, which apparently he wasn't that much into, if we kind of believe him. So he doesn't smoke, he doesn't take drugs, so that's cut out. He claims he doesn't have sex, so that's good. What do you do in the Church of Satan? Really? That's like going into the military and I don't want to shoot guns. What? So the whole idea is that that's the kind of thought there. So he saw this as a great time, and he had communicated with a few others, particularly his Nazi buddy, Stephen Flowers, who was running the Trapezoid Order, who took over the Trapezoid. He didn't start it. Anton LaVey did. He also then got to know and married Lilith, who was running her own satanic branch, and was the head of the vampire temple there. How typically female. So the whole idea is that, so he brought her with it and started a vampire division of, guess what, the Temple of Set. So he copied everything exactly that he got from it. He made up a bunch of stuff. He even admits in his book on the Temple of Set that there's no foundation. There's no religion of Set. There's nothing left that you can piece together. And that goes for any magical or religious system of ancient times. There's really nothing. There's no books on it. We piece stuff together. We think we know what's happening. So he put together this whole fake thing that he actually basically was about him channeling stuff. And here we go, channeling again. Now, I'm going to go back to the, and this is what happened there, and he broke all this stuff, took people with him. How convenient. He went in like all these usurpers do. They go into a successful organization, get to know people, and then they break up with the other one and bring people with them. So what you have is an established organization without establishing it. You didn't start the Temple of Set and put ads in magazines to try and bring people in. You already had a group of people working there, and he didn't care because he didn't want money or anything else, and I'm not sure he really cared. I'm not sure why he even started his own, but it's an ego thing. He could play general again. So this is all part of what he was doing in the actual bigger picture there. Now, the one thing we can get back with the military here as well is that what is PSYOPs? Well, the only thing he states that he ever did for PSYOPs was to make a scary monster-type sound thing. Ooh, we're spirits! Run, run, you're going to die! And he would play this in the battlefields, really, from helicopters high enough that they would not be heard. So you would just hear this, and this would spook you, and you would run and surrender. Claiming that this worked, well, this is a little bit ridiculous. And anybody who's ever been in a firefight or has been around guns, now you can't really hear anything. Once the shooting starts, you're not going to be hearing woo-woo sounds from space. This is what he claimed, the only thing he's ever claimed that he's done in PSYOPs. He also states that he is the PSYOPs expert on the planet while he was doing it, and probably so. Whatever PSYOPs is, we just don't really know what PSYOPs is. He talks about going to Area 51. He talks about knowing about the JFK assassination. He claims to know a lot of intelligent agency things, but is that what PSYOPs is? PSYOPs, yes, I guess it's part of intelligence, but it seems to me that's the kindergarten of intelligence, writing brochures, surrender. So I'm not sure what PSYOPs involves, and it's a very sticky and strange field. But he claims to have done with all this stuff that he worked with all the intelligent agents. Yeah, conveniently. We don't know if any of this is true or not. So this is where he joined the Church of Satan, because he liked this straightforward, take responsibility for your life. The attitude that is this kind of macho ridiculousness. Not make excuses for what? He grew up in it with a gold spoon in his mouth, with living in a beach fantasy world. I don't know what he's talking about. He certainly wasn't jaded by society. He certainly wasn't abused. There's nothing there to actually show that this kind of attitude was something he had to embrace. So going through that, we have to look at all these realities here. So he doesn't seem to have any problems with his childhood whatsoever, even though he doesn't speak in detail of it. But as he said, we do know that his mother lived with him until her death, and it was there, and he lived in kind of a family unit, which we'll talk about as well. It also states that in terms of there seems to be children from Lilith, and I don't think it's his children. He seems to be hiding that, and again, rightfully so. This is a guy who everybody wants to murder. There may be a son involved. We don't know. We believe that Lilith had a son and a daughter from a previous marriage, it appears, who was living with him in San Francisco. Now, were any of these his children? We don't know. He could have adopted them, etc., but we definitely. Now, because this is noted in his book when he was when they came to his house with a search warrant, unexpectedly, that Lilith was there with her daughter, and her son came up with her brother, and apparently his mother was there as well. So she had a brother that was living with her in a downstairs apartment with what apparently is an older son, and she had a daughter, and none of these things you hear about. But this is stated clearly in his book about the Presidio incidents, the child molestation cases that were actually he was accused of. And he's written a whole book on this. And that's, the interesting thing is there. The police also did an investigation of him and supposedly talked to some people in the town. And they claim that he was going to prostitutes. He was bisexual, into S&M. Now, this is supposedly, I don't know if they talked to prostitutes that identified him and gave this information or not. So we don't know if this stuff is valid or not. Again, I cover all this, so check out the other things if you want endless details. I probably got 30 or 40 hours on Michael Aquino here in general. This is kind of a recap. But that's an interesting little fact. Where did they get that from? This is written in a police detective's report. They talked to somebody to get information on him, and this is what they came up with. Now, we do know that the Temple of Set has part of their trapezoid Nazi magic division, has an SMM magic practitioner part of it. Stephen Flowers actually wrote a book on that, which is available. I think I've even reviewed on this channel about S&M magic. He was part of the Marquis de Sade Society in Germany when he studied over there. This is Stephen Flowers, otherwise known as Edred Thorson, who wrote all the rune books, who's a very close friend of Michael Aquino. So the fact is that that's not too strange. Yeah, Aquino tries to dodge that as well. So the idea is that that doesn't make sense. So we do know they were involved in that. It's an open known reality that they have a Nazi magic division. They have a vampire division run by his wife who dresses like that. And they also have part of these divisions ran by Stephen Flowers, a S&M division. And I said he's written a book on this, and you can get it. It's readily available. And I would recommend buying that book. It's at a kindergarten level and says nothing. So we have to fully understand what's going on there. So here he goes in and usurps it, pushing his way in there when he found a reason to demonize Anton LaVey, saying that he was a money grabber. And, well, first of all, he was trying to survive. But what he did was just smart business, as well as giving people of value a couple of steps up the ladder instead of getting next to Joe Blow, who's working at Burger King. So the whole idea is it makes a lot of sense. He took grit. But what he really took umbrage to is he wanted to turn this into a church that had a real being, that Satan was a real god, and that's what he was interested in, so he could play Mr. Metaphysics, when Anton LaVey was, no, this is a philosophical understanding. This is not a religion. So there's a major problem here. So to think that he broke up with Anton LaVey over a money issue is not true. He was looking to get out of it and to take people with him, and I'm sure he discussed this with Lilith. I don't know if they were married at that time or did get married. And of course with Stephen Flowers, again, his little Nazi buddy. These are what formed the group, and basically how many people he took with him is really unknown. But that's very typical of these usurper types. Who wanted something a little more serious. How many people went? What went on there? Well, again, he stole people, set up a pre-existing religion from Anton LaVey. Anton LaVey created it, and he stole everything in what he's done. Just like he went in and got badges, and while he technically stole information from the military in terms of they're following their systems, there's nothing new there. And there's nothing new in the Temple of Set. All he's done is studied ritual magic and incorporated that in there. There's no great study of the Egyptians and what they did or anything else, or who Set was anyway. Set is, there's virtually nothing known about Set as well. But the whole idea was this kind of, and he attracted the same kind of goofballs as he did, and the people involved. And interesting enough, the two people that took over after Aquino were Texans. Don Webb, Stephen Flowers. Yeah, we know where all the good Satanists come from. So, hey. So the whole idea is that this is the reality one. So this is what he did. So let's talk about the Presidio here. And the Presidio is a very interesting situation here with absolutely no proof. Now, at the time, there became the big pedophile molestation preschool scandals, which hit at that time. Apparently, it hit a whole bunch of military bases, and they want to blame just Aquino for everything. And they also blame Aquino maybe in one of these MK Ultra organizations where they went out and murdered close to 100,000 Vietnamese and everything else. Well, maybe he was involved in that. We don't know. It doesn't seem like his personality. He's not really a shoot you in the head kind of guy. He's more a sneak up behind you and stab you kind of guy. I don't know. But regardless of that, he didn't invent that. I think it was the Monarch Project, if I'm correct or not. As I said, don't keep these details here. I've read so many books. It's hard to keep all this 100% perfect straight. It's the bigger picture that is correct. Well, he didn't start that. It wasn't his idea to go there and say, let's do this. As any program that he was involved with, including MK Ultra, he didn't invent it. He worked for people there. They hired him. They put him there. And if he was such a great psychopath that they hired him, it still had nothing to do with him in terms of creating anything. Not only that, he always has commanding officers over him. Now, he's a pretty high rank, but he ain't God, man. He had people over him in his entire military career, and particularly at the Presidio. What was their responsibility? Why don't they know what their officers under them are doing, and how well are they tracked? And we're going to get into this in a minute as we get towards the conclusion here. So the whole idea is at the Presidio there was apparently a worker there who was accused of abusing at least 60 children. Who was basically an ex-Baptist minister who's, per Aquino, was kind of a little doofus. Now, he was accused of everything. At the time that these molestations were going on, this pedophilia, supposedly tied in with rituals, he was not even living in San Francisco. He was attending or teaching at a college in Washington, D.C. This is 100% verifiable, and every day they take attendance. You have to say, are you there? So to think that he could run back and forth on any kind of planes to go back and forth and do things there is highly unlikely. Certainly he could do this maybe once a week, but to try and fly from Washington to California, which I believe is 6 hours going in that direction, it takes longer, I believe, to get from there. Go through all that rigmarole, go over to someplace, and then do this and have the energy and else to do it. Then get back on a plane and get back to class the next morning seems to me to be very doubtful. So to think that could happen, he was not even there. They confirmed that by attendance records that he was at this other place. So there's no way. Now, the person that was accused of all this, over 60 cases, it started off at 60, maybe even more. Depends on what records you look at. Ultimately came down to only one charge against this worker, this ex-Baptist minister. Isn't that so typical? That charge, guess what, was eventually dropped. So nobody at the Presidio was convicted of anything. Now, at one particular instance, some child, we don't know if this was motivated by Daddy, who, by the way, was a minister, and through political pressure as well, they wanted to hang the Satanist in the military. I forget the politician who was behind that. I've stated that in other lectures here. A very well-known hillbilly from the South. We got to get them Satanists because only I can be a Satanist. I'm from Texas. So the whole idea is that, I forget the name of it, but Jesse Helms, there we go. This nut job goofball labeled Michael Aquino as "Go Get Aquino." Okay? So this is what everything was labeled at and where became a fascinating story. So, but he wasn't even there. So from the pressure from Jesse Helms, the military went ahead and did investigations on a guy who wasn't even there. Trumping up information, putting together facts and figures which were all frauds. So I allege and everything else. He wasn't there. One of his greatest detractors and a person who claims he knew him, which has been proven to be pretty much complete gaga, as well as being kind of a very weird dude, to put it mildly, Douglas Dietrich has put in an actual entire film, or a little lecture he used to give, of how he saved Michael Aquino by telling the investigative boards there that Michael Aquino had nothing to do with this. He was in Washington, D.C. He wasn't even there, and that is correct during this whole time. So this appears to be a giant witch hunt, completely unjustified of a person who, I mean, how much more credibility can you get? You're at the opposite end of the country, literally, in Washington, D.C., which is almost on the coast, Delaware, and what's happening is on the coast of San Francisco. You're not there, and they still go after you. Very, very strange. And it seems to be totally and completely construed and rigged to go against him because Jesse Helms told the military, you do it. Kill these 50,000 people. Let's cut them children up and be like, yeah. Yes, sure. So, that's what they do, as they do to this day, and as they keep murdering and butchering Muslims, and nobody gives a shit, yet we cry for the Ukrainian scum. So the whole idea is we run into all the things that go on there and the kind of nonsense, but the military does whatever it's told, and they're just murderers. They're not fighting for me. They're not fighting for the country. If they want to fight for the country, well, maybe they should go to Washington, D.C. and have some target practice. But I diverse, which I didn't want to do. So let's get back to the facts. So the whole idea is that we're talking about this. So he wasn't even there. Now, a source who hates Aquino has come up and said this himself, Douglas Dietrich, who has no credibility, but it just shows another person who has a timeline. A lot of people think he has some legitimacy, but that's another story. Listen to my lectures on that dude. So the whole idea is he wasn't there. We do know that. We don't need this guy's telling us that. So he did do stuff that nobody likes, running around with his vampire outfit. And of course, he's a big, big hero of dark shadows, which he worships. And he wears the haircut and the little outfit that Barnaby had in the dark shadows. So this is a big thing because he's a fantasist. You got to remember, it's Mad Magazine and Horror Magazine. Okay? And I guess when he puts his horror stuff on, he kind of thinks it's funny. But he loves wearing little outfits and playing, apparently. He's been doing that all his life. I'm assuming he got that from his mother as well, who probably did a lot of that as well. So these are the kind of things we have to look at and fully understand of what's going on there. So what happened there at the Presidio is that this minister claims that his daughter, his stepdaughter, identified Aquino as molesting her, pointed him out in the base exchange. So, the PX, you get free stuff there, you get discounts because you're in the army. So the whole idea is that this then led to investigations. It sounds to me like all of this is a little bit ridiculous because he wasn't even there. They claim that this child identified him and Lilith, his wife, and that they were taken to his house and she identified what was in there. But there's a certain amount of stuff in there that apparently was well known even in the press. There's some talk that TV had even went into his home and filmed it prior to these statements. So it was known the type of house he had. But the details of the house are kind of wrong. They said the living room was painted black when it was the bedroom that was painted black. Well, that's a big discrepancy. So sounds to me like somebody didn't get their facts right from watching a TV interview. How such young children can identify everything, and they claim, well, they drove them all around the neighborhood, then they came over here. Well, I don't believe that, and I think that everybody, and you don't have to be children to be manipulated. It's pretty easy. Children who believe in talking mice and flying Dumbo the elephant, and what is all the other stuff that Sesame Street, talking, trash cans, whatever it is, with the fantasy that we push down children's throats for no apparent reason. Why we think they relate to that better, I don't quite understand that. But the bottom line is that we have to understand that these are not credible sources. Asking children, you can manipulate children very easily. You can manipulate adults. I mean, Derek Brown, the famous British illusionist and psychologist to a large degree, he got people to kill people by manipulating them, literally, and through some hypnotism. This is pretty amazing. And this is talked, you could never do that. You won't take your clothes off. You won't do anything that you're against. Like hell you won't. You can be programmed to do anything. You can be manipulated. That's what illusionists, so-called stage magicians, do all the time. It's all an illusion. You can't see what's going behind that jacket, that hand, etc. You think something is real there, but it's all happening behind where you can't see. They tricked you. You're a stooge. It's a $2 trick, and you just go, wow, it's amazing. So the point is that you can easily trick people. So I don't really have any value to what any children say about anything. They're known for their false statements. And the other problem we have is people that go into regurgitate hidden memories. Well, they may have been traumatized. Maybe they have been abused. But can pulling these memories out have any value? Well, I doubt all this stuff. And certainly I'm not going to put somebody's neck on the line based on these kind of things. So now the gossip is with all these things and figuring out is that, they drove around the neighborhood. They took different photos of Aquino in different outfits. One with him sucking on a lollipop, one with the finger in the ear. And that the children were able to identify him, or some children. And it's not just this one, but the original Army case against him was based on only this child, and the Army investigation ended the case, even though they were told by Jesse Helms to go after him. But the actual evidence was so pathetic, and there were so much problems with bringing everybody to court here that they dropped this officer's claim against the military. What this guy did was take it to the civilian courts, and of course then you sue somebody as civilian to civilian. And this is done very commonly when you find no recourse using the federal court system connected to it. Now, in this particular case, the Army decided to pay this guy off just to shut him up, because it would probably cost millions of dollars to fight this case. So what people do is they settle. So they settled for a couple of $100,000, which is probably the fee of maybe 1 month of attorneys, and this probably would have went on for years. And this guy got a settlement of $200,000 for this particular child and what happened there. So that's what happened to that Zentaya. I don't think people know what happened there, that there were no federal charges brought against him. All those were dropped, and he was the military settled a civilian suit against them. Okay? They didn't win it. They settled it. They say, okay, we don't declare any wrongdoing here, but we'll pay you this amount of money. This happens all the time. So the entire Presidio case seems to be completely, totally bogus, trunked up, and pushed by a radical, hateful, like all Christians are, to hang this guy because they don't like him. So this was what happened at the Presidio. Now, after this and became so public, we went through the Satanic Panic time, where he then went on TV show after TV show, including Oprah, and who else did he? He went on all the big shows. I'm trying to think of any big... Geraldo Rivera, who was big into this, and everybody watched it. This was a phenomenon at the time. So he went there. He was on most talk shows. He went the entire talk show circuit trying to give his story, along with Zena LaVey, because he was out of the Church of Satan at that time. But Aquino, I don't know if he talked with Anton LaVey or not. I don't think so. But he said, you should be represented there. You are being accused like everybody else. He refused, but he sent Zena his child there. And they became friends, Zena and Aquino. And Aquino seems to have some sort of personal magnetism as he drew her into the church, as he's been married to many different attractive women within the church. I don't know if that's his rank and his money, because how many Satanists are making good money, or that want to admit it? So apparently he was able to pick up on all these other women there, and they found him attractive for one reason or another. Maybe it was his feminine features, particularly in the Church of Satan. So all of that we have to look at as an understanding of what's going on in the bigger picture here of what he's doing. Now, here's where all the trouble comes in. It's very, very interesting when you look at these things of that, how it works. So after this, and after he was splattered everywhere, everybody knows what he looks like. And he's probably the only person other than Anton LaVey that you would recognize. Zena then became well known because of that, but she tried to sell books and do other things, and not. She eventually also she joined the Temple of Set and went against her father as well. So we just don't know. And she's the one that had a baby at 13 as well. So we don't know with all that stuff what the reality of it is going on. But so he went around to defend himself. He was brought out. He was accused. He really had no choice. You either hide behind there and let everybody think, you go out into the front lines and you plead your case. And that's what he did. That was probably the smart thing to do. Now, what gets mixed up in this is that they try and go after common Satanists and link them in with the criminal Satanists that are doing all sorts of things. You know, like all the criminal Christians that do all sorts of things. And, you know, there's good Christians, bad Christians, like everything else. With the Satanic Panic and the McMartin preschool case, which went on for many, many years. And the people there were eventually convicted of nothing, even though there seems to have been a lot going on there. But people just couldn't get behind that and understand it and what was going on there. And there's always dubious things going on there. The children all state that they were molested, yet apparently there weren't much physical damage. If you're going to have intercourse with children as with adults, this is going to have physical things left behind. So a lot of this tended to be missing, and the McMartin preschool was thought of as just a panic that went on. And ultimately, after I think it was going on for 5 or 6 years, nothing came, no charges. Nobody was ever convicted of that. Yet there seems to be very strong evidence that, yes, there was something going on there. They did find tunnels and other things, as investigated by Ted Gunderson, the ex-FBI agent who investigated that. Now, Aquino was not hooked up to McMartin in any way whatsoever. Now, that doesn't mean that because the Temple of Set was not involved with it, or the Church of Satan, that these things weren't going on. Well, I would think those organizations are squeaky clean because they're under the microscope. So I don't think things are going to happen. Do you think Aquino can do anything? Well, not through the Temple of Set because they're watching them. Now, here's the big problem with Aquino, and there are numerous people out there that accuse him of being involved in intelligence agencies' brainwashing, conditioning, and torture. And there's a fairly long list of these. But this was all after these TV programs, and most people can't identify anybody else. And how come only he's identified? You know, he seems to be the red herring, the place to point your finger at, and may even been programmed into people's minds for this. So if you're being brainwashed, what would you do? Well, you want to put the brainwashing that this guy did it. And of course, everybody knows him. He's on TV. It seems to be very much planned that way. So there's several people, and they all blame him. They name him. I'm not sure how valid this or not. One person that names him was a person, Banaki, 7 personalities. He knows Aquino. Doesn't know anybody else that victimized him, but he knows Aquino because he was a member, not from TV, a member of the Temple of Set. I'm not sure if that could be proven or not. The other people were all mentally brainwashed and traumatized, beaten and tortured people that are naming him. Are these good sources? I don't think so. I'm afraid not. And if they are been brainwashed, why not slip Aquino in there? I know I would do if I wanted to cover out. Let's go after that guy. He's decided to go out and be public. He's kind of hurting us. Let's put him. So I'm afraid, unfortunately, these people don't hold water, like Kathy O'Brien and Paul Bonacci. These people are not credible witnesses, even though they have come up in some cases, which apparently is startling information to identify certain people, like Johnny Gosch. Apparently he could name the actual, and I wonder about this, if this wasn't programmed into him as well. Now here is a guy that he victimized and even raped, yet he knows every area of this guy's body where he has scars and other things. Well, that's a little bit too much detail for my liking. The pieces fit together too easily. He also identifies Michael Aquino as being involved in so many other things. So does several other people. But it's convenient. It's always this guy. They're not talking about anybody else. There's not even this other mysterious guy who parted his hair on the side and walked with a limp, whatever that may be. Nobody. It's all Michael Aquino because he's the easily fall guy. So there's very little credibility to go on there. Now, to prove that he's done anything. So the point is that I have no love for this guy. He's kind of a freaky, weird guy. I don't think I would spend much time with him if I knew him. Bottom line is that this doesn't add up. None of it adds up very well, and we can't convict somebody of a heinous crime like this without having proof other than from people that are all victims of mind control and been tortured. Which a lot of this doesn't add up. Kathy O'Brien, who's got this whole book out there, The Trancing of America, and writes down that Chris Christopherson, Ronald Reagan, she had sex with all these people. They're all into bestiality and so many other things. I just don't get all that stuff, and I'm not sure that this is something that is something that people are into as much as bestiality. Well, you know, it's a good shock effect. Are people really into that? Well, we do know that people do these things. But, you know, these are very aberrant behavior from a very tiny group of people. So, you know, you can understand pedophilia to a degree. That's in your own species. But, you know, they're bringing all these other things in which are even more outrageous. She's also tortured horribly, whipped and bleeding. And 2 hours later, she's having sex with somebody. Her jaw's banged out of alignment from bad oral sex. Yet she's able to perform right after that. If you know anything about that, it's way too painful, and you're probably out of commission for months. You don't generally hurt people to that degree if you expect to use them as sex slaves. So a lot of it just doesn't add up. And she names names of the top celebrities out there. Was this put into her mind? Well, she's brainwashed. How can we possibly believe anything she says? They're implanting these things to make it look so ridiculous, including Bob Hope and other people. Now, I don't consider any of these people special or less deviant than the population, but it seems pretty hard for me to believe. And who pops up in all these things? Well, it's after Bob Hope raped me, Michael Aquino did, and he came in and tortured me, and he's traveling. I don't know why he would personally need to do that either. So why would this military officer be flying around the country to go after these individuals? Another person, Schurter, claims he was trained as a child to be the Antichrist. None of this adds up. And he can't name a single technique that Aquino ever taught him. He talks about shamanism, that he was taught by somebody else, and of course, Michael Aquino never preached shamanism, nor knows anything about it. So a lot of things don't add up. And if we're going to convict innocent people, as disgusting as they be, we're not getting at the root cause. We're convicting people while the guilty go out there and continue to offend. So, also, this guy, if you are one of those type of people, which quite frankly I'm not, but he put in military service and risked his life for his country. So the whole idea is this is a guy who has dedicated himself to the, isn't that what they call it? I was in the service. Service to what? You're getting paid, aren't you? Yeah. Well, then you weren't giving somebody a free service, were you? Well, kind of. In your book, maybe. But the bottom line is that that's the stupid reality that we're fed by everybody, the facts. So we have to give credit where credit's due. So, and we have to go after those things. So the bottom line is that so there we do have several people who claim as eyewitnesses that they were tortured by and Aquino was the person doing it. Well, there are probably as many as 10 to 20 eyewitnesses that finger him. and nobody else. So he worked alone. He had no buddies. He wasn't doing anything special. All this doesn't add up. I don't know how you could work in the military and jump around like he's done and be completely untracked or know what you're happening. You got to remember that Michael Aquino was a lieutenant colonel, which the next rank up is a general, which is interesting as well that they would give this strange dude such high ranking. But he also he had commanding officers, people that he had to report to. I forget the guy's name, but it's out there, and I think he's still alive. Well, we need to go to his commanding officers. Where was Michael Aquino on this day? Paul Bonacci states that he was taken to a house that Michael Aquino was running or owned. He didn't own it because it was found out it wasn't in his name. And of course, you'd have to be crazy to do that. In Colorado Springs, Colorado. And names him as that. Apparently this house was actually owned by a prison guard, a federal prison guard. That's interesting. Again, we get these curious tie-ins which could link it to government and federal government, which could be intelligence agencies, which could be military. So he links it there to this particular place, but there's nobody else. Nobody knows. They don't know anybody else's name. He is named because he happens to know him. Or he happens to want to verify his story and wants to conveniently state that Aquino was there. We don't know, but we have dates and times. So let's talk to his commanding officer and ask him, where was your officer at this date and time, and we could solve this whole problem pretty quickly. And we can do that across the board with all these accusations against him. Kathy O'Brien, it was in Washington, D.C., which we know he was there, but was he there at that date and time? There are other places as well. Omaha, well, was he at that base at that date and time? In that area where he's supposed to be working with Scherter, that claims as a child he was programmed and abused by Aquino, and in making him the Antichrist. Another guy who's got serious mental problems as well as everything else going. This guy is a mess, as is Kathy O'Brien, as is Bonacci. I mean, these are people that are complete destroyed mental problem people. Now, is that part of their strategy? Well, that's what you do. You destroy people. You get them to become these mental cases, these severely mentally damaged, because then they don't have any credibility. Well, it certainly is a good tact, and these people don't care about anybody, so this certainly could go on. It's not surprising. Okay, so as we understand all that stuff, it could very much be that. I mean, this is a guy who's in the military, stationed in the United States, has a commanding officer which should know exactly where he is all the time, and nothing is being done about it. It's also interesting that Aquino doesn't come out and say, look, I wasn't there. Now, he did that already with the Presidio, and it didn't work very well. Should he continue to do this with other things? Does it get him anywhere? But being accused of these things that are happening, etc., does that have any value? If he can be traced, and his commanding officer is the one that we need to look into. So we should be able to track where he is, at least in proximity, or at least where he's supposed to be. And his commanding officer ought to know where he's at on August 12th. Well, where is he? Where was he stationed? Is there proof that he was at that location? So if he was stationed at some particular base, did he sign in somewhere? Did he talk to people? I mean, this can be traced pretty easily. Now, the fact that we don't have better tracing from Aquino himself is a question as well. But, you know, nobody cares what he says. He wasn't even at a place, and they accused him of massive child molestations when he wasn't there at all. And ultimately, only one child accused him in that area. The other offender, who again was a Christian minister, that was ex-Christian minister who ran the daycare center, was not convicted on any charges whatsoever. He was accused by another minister on that base, an active minister, of going after his stepdaughter, which ultimately proved not to be strong enough to go after him. These are the questions that come up. And the point is that this doesn't make any sense whatsoever and can be, you would think it'd be able to be verified by his military record by talking to his commanding officer, who certainly hasn't come to his age. Now, Michael Aquino, I've caught him in many lies. He thinks everybody loves him. My buddy, this good friend of mine. This is what he talks about other generals and so forth. He also claims that his contract was provably ended by the military in 1990. His full-time reserve officer contract ended then. The military ended it. He states that he had a part-time contract with the military in Colorado at a Army Space Division, and he was the first person to take it over and work with other people like the infamous John Alexander general. So all of these things is what he claimed he did. And of course, again, we should be able to verify this. Who's your commanding officer? Can you verify that? Now, I don't think there's any national security problems there for somebody to verify where somebody is at a particular time, particularly after these years. But now everybody is dying, they're old, they're retired, and we're going to be able to not verify any of that. Now, this house that Paul Bonacci claimed to have been taken to was the same place where Michael Aquino was last stationed. Now, the times don't make sense, though. It's 10 years earlier than where. But he did go to Colorado Springs to NORAD. And then, of course, this house was supposed to be, of all the states, how come it's in Colorado? And, of course, that's where he was taken to, Paul Bonacci, with these other children, where they were molested and used at swing-type parties of young people. So the whole idea is that I find that convenient as well. It's kind of interesting. Again, it's the constant stirring of back and forth, clockwise, counterclockwise, of a big, giant confusion. Now, people have infiltrated the Temple of Set. There is, of course, Linda Blood, who wrote a book on him, saying had an affair with him, talking about the Temple of Set. There's the Magician book by Jenny Scott, who spent 6 months in the Temple of Set. And none of these talked about any kind of these strange things going on. The Temple of Set book by Jeannie Graham Scott, he ran his Temple of Set organization pretty much like the military. And if you were a troublemaker, caused problems, a drunkard, a drug addict, he threw you out. If you didn't constantly move ahead doing research and investigations, he demoted you. So this is the kind of story we get back. There's no, in any way, any criminal, strange, or even sexuality connected to the Temple of Set. Now, we do know this is going on. And what does the inter order do? Well, we don't know what the inner order does and what's involved. Now, the outer order are people they bring in and expose to the other members. Initially, we know this has to be a clean organization, or it'd be too easy to run into problems. So, but it appears from everything that we know that there is nothing to talk about. And even Linda Blood's book, who seemed to have a thing about Michael Aquino, there's no talking about him personally doing anything strange, bedroom activity, interest. He has been linked to by the police as possibly being bisexual and being into sadomasochism. Well, this wasn't mentioned in Linda Blood's book, who had sex with him. So all of this is in great question. Now, the fact is that this guy is a social deviant, and he enjoys it and likes the game of it and being different and being recognized for being different, because he doesn't really have any skill. He's not really bright. He's not intellectual. He's nothing in those areas. His writing is typically poorly done. Higher education writing, quoting, because, you know, they want you to quote other people constantly, not think for yourself. So he does this all the time in his writings, what Nietzsche said, and the dialogues of Plato. So this is the kind of shit he writes, and it's very tedious and boring. So he's not a great intellect in any way. How he's broken down the Temple of Set and how he classifies magical practices is all taken from other people and really almost childish and infantile in how it's talked about. And it's really not very clear, and it's not someone who's thought about it and then put it into proper, easy-to-understand language. He hasn't done that. So that's just not the reality of it. So, he's a legend in his own mind. And we need to understand that with the bigger picture that's going on here. So connecting him to these things, and everybody likes to go after him because he is the red herring. Everybody can identify him, and they do. If you want to talk about pedophilia, if you want to talk about Satanism, you talk about the people that are out there. Now, Anton LaVey has been dead too long, and I haven't heard anybody overly discuss anything he's been in him, but the guy who's been around until last couple of years, that he died a couple of years ago in 2020, he has been the red herring, the kickball of reality out there, so people would state him. And they would state him why? Well, there's only two reasons. He was actually involved, which is very difficult to prove, but we could, if we had his commanding officer, to at least find out, well, yeah, he was stationed here. If we get him where there were problems and he was there at the same exact times, well, that gives us some more food for thought. Most likely, these people are trying to justify their story by telling somebody that can be easily identified. And of course, if we want to look at the third problem here, if all this evidence is so strong and it is being so ignored, then we have a serious problem with investigative people and in justice and law in general. And we know that's a problem as well, a high level of corruption. So was he able to get away with everything because he was an intelligence officer? And there's probably tens of thousands of these intelligence officers. So he was labeled, and I'm sure he had little support in the military, and they were more than happy to get him labeled as the bad boy and to dump all the poo on him. It's an easy way to get it off of you. He's the red herring. Is there any truth to anything that he did, that he was involved in this? Well, we know the Presidio is a giant joke, that nothing happened there with him. We even had his enemies verify this. So we've had this verification there of all this. So nobody sit down and made any kind of record of where he was at. They just want to assume, oh, well, there's a military next to Omaha, Nebraska, where there has been the Franklin savings debacle and pedophilia ring. Well, I mean, there are military bases everywhere in the United States. You can't go more than 50 miles without running into one. So I'm not sure how that can be any kind of validity whatsoever. So they're everywhere. So the fact that there are military bases all over Colorado, what a surprise. All over California, all over Nebraska, all over New York, all over Florida, Texas, all over the place. So there's not a state that doesn't have military base. Alaska. So the point is you can say, well, yeah, I was attacked in Alaska, and there's a military base there. Yeah, well, there's a military base everywhere. This is not conclusive evidence. So what we know about the inner workings of the Temple of Set is that they don't advocate anything illegal or dangerous because that would get them into serious trouble, and they're fairly open. They have come out to be what's deplorable about Michael Aquino is his fantasy reality of what the Nazis were, glorifying them as some sort of special people. And it shows how ignorant he is and how fantasist he is. He claims to be well read, but he doesn't understand that. And as a person who's into magical energies, to have a dagger from Himmler, one of the most psychotic murderers of all time, really you have to worry about, and certainly achieved absolutely nothing. He has some fantasy that was some sort of great mystery school that the failed chicken farmer was running, that over 13,000 people died, the slaves that he had to build his castle, and we go on and on with that. And he likes to criticize the Nazis in one way, but he glorifies them as most military do. So that's what's really sick about him. He warps history as he warps most things. He doesn't seem to get it. He talks about the politics in one interview and the economy, and doesn't seem to have a clue of what politics are, how to run anything. But of course, he's a military man, and that's of course what happened after the World Wars and why we're in such a deep poo hole, because of the fact that they don't know how to do anything. You turn the military over in a occupational force to do what? They have no idea what they're doing. So the whole idea is this is a prime example of all that. So, and he, like so many other military people, likes to talk about the fact that, well, we got to figure out how to not kill each other. And I've heard this from so many military people, and it's almost comical. The military's there for one reason and one reason only, and that's to kill people. As simple as that. The rest of it is a fantasy that they want to somehow interweave into doing it. That's not what they do. So they have this kind of attitude. He wants to come off as a grandfatherly type. None of this adds up. And on the other hand, there doesn't seem to be, you can't run an organization that is so public and be up to so many other things going on there. Now, the whole idea is that because he's part of the pedophilia criminal intelligence agencies, the CIA, the NSA, etc., that are involved in all of these different activities, and it's been proven so, that he was part of this. Well, if he was a pawn as part of the entire game. So if he's part of MK Ultra, he didn't start it. If he's part of some pedophilia ring, he didn't start it. If he's involved in anything negative, illegal, and perverse, he didn't start it. He was another pin in a big, giant pin cushion. So to demonize him because he's easy to grab and because he's a outspoken Satanist who has been named seems to me to be way too convenient and doesn't hold water. I do find this guy to be strange, weird person in general. It's amazing that the U.S. military would tolerate this, considering most of them are Texas hillbillies. But you got to remember, most of these hillbilly types are Satanists. They just don't come out with it. So all of this tends to be very strange. His last 4 years, which he claims he was in this NORAD at a part-time contract, his full-time contract was canceled, but he then went back in a part-time contract to take over this space program, which I wouldn't doubt, particularly since he apparently has lots of connections and claims he's so well loved in the military. So could he got a contract where they said, well, okay, we'll give you a contract. We're going to stick you in Cherokee Mountain where nobody's going to see you or think anything about you, and we'll do that because these charges we feel, and with his buddies, and apparently is the case, that he was not there, may have given him this contract, which then after that 4-year contract, he retired from the military. Now, other than this house that claimed where people were taken in Colorado, which was basically 10 years before he was stationed there, or at least anywhere from 5 to 10 years before he was stationed there, doesn't add up as well. So, it is interesting that they would mention Colorado, though, which brings a question mark, but the time frames just don't fit. But it certainly would be. If you're going to take a problematic person who you don't want to be overly known, you're going to put him in a super secret area. You're going to make sure it's a place where he comes into very limited contact with the public. And as far as I know, it has a particular time period, which was 1990 to 1994. There were no allegations of anything going on in that Colorado area that he would, because they always want to track things. Well, at that time there, of course, that's poor evidence as well, but at least it's kind of thinkable or judgeable to a certain extent. But the bottom line is that there was nothing going on in that Colorado area that I've ever heard about in terms of people stating that this was an area for lots of satanic activity and lots of pedophilia going on. That was not mentioned. Omaha was a hotbed, and other places, and it seems to be a lot of Midwest places. The Johnny Gosh, was she in Indiana? But a lot of children just appeared there. And claimed to go into this network that Paul Bonacci claims stretched over into Colorado to this house ran by Michael Aquino in the 80s. So, and again, does that timeline fit? Where was he at that time? What does his commanding officer say? Well, we just don't know. I mean, the Michael Aquino case, if you could get cooperation from the military, could be figured out to a large degree. Was he stationed in this area? How much freedom did he have to, if he was stationed in Omaha, could he fly to California anytime he wanted to? Is this what his commanding officer allowed him to do? Was that part of it? Being part of psychological warfare? Could he do that? Why did he just decide to fly over here? He claims he went to Area 52 and everything else, where claims he didn't see any extraterrestrial stuff, and that extraterrestrial stuff is not real in his statements. So he pretty much, as he states, could go anywhere and do anything he wants. And of course, he was also a satanic chaplain, meaning the fact that he could go to different places and get through it saying, well, I'm a chaplain, I'm here to speak to whomever. But the point is that there wasn't that many Satanists in the military. Can you just go to a place and say, I'm a chaplain, I'm here to speak to somebody, and they just salute you and say, yes, sir? Well, could very well be true. That's very military. You know, once you have rank in the military, you do whatever if you're an officer, nobody can challenge you. So this is pretty much what's going on with all this stuff, and we have to take into consideration. So Michael Aquino's now been dead for a couple of years. We could solve this case pretty easily, as I've just outlined, by following and seeing if there's any connection to, yeah, he was here and he was here. Well, that's not 100% proof, but it starts to close the book entirely. The bottom line here is we have absolutely no idea, and he didn't originate any programs. He didn't originate MK Ultra. If he helped as a psychological and torture aspect of which he put his 2 cents in, well, it was his 2 cents. He wasn't in control of it. This is a reserve officer who got a contract with the military, working with career officers that went through West Point and many intelligence agencies. I would think that he would be looked down upon as a general, oh, you're one of those ROTC idiots. So I don't know how much he was loved or accepted. He also is kind of the nerdy guy. Now, the bigger military likes the fact that, oh, you can pass a test. You know, at this particular time in the military, particularly the 60s and 70s, only got the stupidest people in the world there. The amount of people that were Ivy League college graduates that went to Vietnam was, I think, under 10. So the whole idea, that's how ridiculous it was. So he was one of the few intelligence ones, had all these certificates, and the Army liked it. Secondly, they couldn't throw him out for religion alone. There's nothing they could do about that, whether you liked it or not. That's the law. So we need to keep that in mind as well. How much he was liked and loved, we just have no idea. But there's some pretty shocking evidence when, you know, we all want to believe people, and they come up and they point the finger, and you think that they know what they're talking about. They do. Brainwashed, traumatized, tortured half to death, schizophrenic people know what they're talking about. Is that the witness you want going against you? Is that, as a jury, what you would believe? This guy with 7 personalities is pointing a finger at this guy? Well, we can't give him any credibility. Nor can we give a woman who's half tortured to death, been used as a sex slave for 30 years. Can we go by that? Who claims that she's had sex with Ronald Reagan, with numerous animals and everything else, like this 70-year-old guy with Alzheimer's could even get it up. It doesn't make sense. So I just don't get it. Anything's possible, but to have him as the only bad guy is very convenient, because he's also the guy that everybody can point their finger to. Well, we know he's a Satanist, and of course all Satanists are pedophiles, right? Well, this is just not true. It certainly is an intellectual pursuit in lots of cases, and affrontive to the hypocritical and evil Christian church, who have done much worse crimes to many more people by the tens of millions under the church crimes that have happened from the Inquisitions on, where people were burned at the stake, their property was taken. Oh, we're just going to ignore that. So I certainly don't think that Satanism is an alternative, but it certainly can be understood while people move away from the hypocritical, evil Christian and mainstream religions that have done pretty much nothing. But Michael Aquino is not a genius. He's not smart. He's not creative. He came up with nothing new. His books are all poorly written ultimately, don't really get into very good information. There's nothing there to speak of. They're hollow, empty, full of cliches and references to real thinkers, because that's what you do when you're stupid. Plato said, Kant said, Schopenhauer mentioned in his book. This is what you do when you're stupid. You basically quote other people. He also has not read on anything. He claims that he has never voted and was never in a political party. It's another thing which I find interesting, because the military is very political, and generally they vote for the commander-in-chief, and that's part of the reality that we have to deal with. They tend to be right-wing, yet he avoided that. Another very unsocial thing to do, particularly in the military, where everybody's expected to vote as part of what they're doing and vote for a particular power structure. He's against all that and has never voted, never will, and doesn't see any of that as any value. Doesn't believe in democracy. He's basically a fascist that thinks some king should rule. That's where he's coming from, and of course that's how he set up his organization. It's interesting, but he has stated this. He knows nothing about economics and hasn't read anything about, after all, he's not interested in that, and he's had money. Apparently enough money that he doesn't have to be overly concerned of counting it and managing it. So the whole idea is that he knows nothing about economics, he knows nothing about that whole issue there, and doesn't understand politics at all. You think that a military officer would have a better grasp of it. Or, you know, as I've said, Michael, read a book on money. So he doesn't know anything about it. He doesn't know anything about politics, and it just shows you how limited he is and how bad his research is, that he's not this scholar of the world and figured everything out. He hasn't. And he doesn't come up with anything new. He's a quoter. You know, basically, his books are nothing but plagiarism of somebody else's. That's how I look at it. And the more you quote other people, the more that you're not doing your own thinking. You should state exactly how you feel with your own interpretations that you may have help from some other source. That is not done. He is not intelligent. He is not at any level of that whatsoever. He thinks he's a great thinker. He thinks he's a great writer, and none of this is the truth. And there's nothing interesting, shocking, or profound about the Temple of Set. And the birth of that, the mother and father of the Temple of Set, is the Church of Satan, which is this uneducated Anton LaVey, whose Satanic Bible is not plagiarized, it's copied from other books. 90% of that book has been copied from other people. He threw it together to make it, to get a quickie book out, and that's exactly what happened. So, certainly, this is no genius either. So, and there's no new thoughts there either. None of this is new thoughts, just like most things. There's no new approaches to things. There's no nothing. And certainly Aquino didn't put any of that. His rituals and everything we know about the Temple of Set are just old, stinky, boring, magical techniques that he's added the Set character to. The murderer of Horus, and the bringer of disease and trouble, the same Satanist type realities. There's nothing there. There's nothing new. There's nothing unusual. There's no new facts he got. His whole book is The Coming of the Night. I mean, these are fantasy comic books, which I'm sure he wrote while sitting in his dark shadow uniform and thinking like a vampire with his wife biting on him, who's the female vampire. So the whole idea is we have that with, of course, the dagger of Himmler close by his side. I mean, this is the mentality of this person. It's really hard to take him seriously or in any way to think that he has any kind of mentality. Now, if he was involved in intelligence agency atrocities, which we know are real, well, obviously him and a bunch of others, literally thousands, even tens of thousands, while he should be condemned for that, we should be headhunting all those other scumbuckets who are doing that stuff today. We have a lot of people who have supported this international pedophilia ring that go from the very high up in government all around the world through all of the federal and local and state law enforcement who are all part of this high corruption. So going after Aquino is really a joke. Let's go after his officers. Where was he? What was he doing? And if there's a problem, They should be thrown in jail because they didn't watch their officers. The other thing is what level of corruption continues to go on with all of these people. We need to go after the corruption. And to pointing at one person, demonizing him while it's an entire organization is absurd. It's the organization that's wrong, not the individuals within it. But if we're going to go after Aquino, there are tens of thousands out there left to go after. Hundreds of military intelligence officers that are involved in this pedophilia, drug smuggling, and murder. All of them are out there. It's been proven that this is... Let's go after them, and let's go after the people that assist this and keep those organizations going. That's what we need to do. Not go after Aquino alone. Now, we can't even go after him. He's dead. Plain and simple. So, he got cancer in apparently 2015, was having problems before that. So he's been out of commission since 2015 at the very least, probably 2010. So it's now been about 10 years before he actually died, but it went through that particular problem. He also claims that he was almost blind before his death in an interview. He could barely see, he couldn't write, he couldn't barely use his computer. So he was in very bad shape just before he died. So he certainly was not in any position to be doing stuff for almost 10 years, since 2010 on, at least. So to think that he was doing all these other things even before that is nothing more than nasty speculation. Certainly we don't have to like this guy and everything else, but there's a lot of thought forms I don't like out there, particularly those that are the popular religions, steeped in hatred and misery and torture and death, because they stayed in those books out there that you can kill other people, witches and people you don't agree with, and how you should go out and murder animals. This is in these holy books. And you can listen to these people that they quote this crap. So, we've got to be very careful here, and if we don't find the facts, if we don't find the troublemakers, and we don't go after the root cause and those who are supporting this, and we keep cutting the weeds that grow up and never getting the root out, well, nothing ever changes, and of course society loves that. And your pundits, particularly those idiots that claim to be in the public domain, or your little truth speakers, or your people out there, they're doing nothing but filling their pockets and have zero credibility. So this case is interesting only to the fact that there are a number of eyewitnesses that are pointing the finger at Aquino, but it doesn't really hold much water. But there's always a doubt there. Why would they say that? We're saying, well, why would you point your finger? Have you been able to identify this person? Well, yeah, one of my 7 personalities identifies him. The other ones are surfing, playing pool, eating burgers. But one guy says it's him. Then the other woman who's been beaten and tortured all of her life, used by Bob Hope, Chris Christopherson, the list goes on and on, Ronnie Reagan, and all the other people out there, and all these politicians, etc., was horribly tortured and beaten, yet was able to be, within a few hours, another sex toy. Doesn't add up. And it goes with so many people. Then we have people that claim they know everything from their childhood, who was horribly abused. Well, I don't think you can remember anything, but it does make your story special if you're part of the national conspiracy. And who do you name? Well, who does everybody name? Michael Aquino. After all, he was on every television show for months, and I didn't even know he was on Oprah. He was on Oprah, he was on all the big shows, and of course, Geraldo Rivera, who was famous for this and had a show on and was thought as one of the top journalists in the country. So the whole idea is everybody names him, which doesn't make sense. And why would you, if it's a secret organization, put somebody out there that could be easily identified? It doesn't make any sense. But even casting that aside, we certainly could be able to identify where he was at what times. He's in the bloody military. Doesn't people get that? Don't they have records of all this stuff? Of course they do. Now, how good they are and how corrupt they are, we don't know. But we have to start naming other people, and we have to go up the chain of command. Well, who was his supervisor? Who was his commanding officer? And who was the commanding officer of his commanding officer? And why weren't they watching this, particularly after allegations or even before that, to investigate people? doesn't add up. And it doesn't add up that all these celebrities which get your attention were involved in all this stuff as well. So I don't know. It certainly is possible. These are the way you control people. These are the perks you get. And there is a totally different world going on than you and I live in. Because people that are in power do whatever they want and control whomever they want. So certainly this is possible. But to think that an elderly, half-senile Ronald Reagan was able to physically perform sexually, I think is absurd. So the whole idea is that all of these things don't make a lot of sense, plain and simple. So we will have to look at all that stuff. So as kind of a good long discussion on him, because there's a lot to cover, this should give people a pretty firm understanding of who this guy was. And there's no trauma in the background making him into a psychopath, which is interesting. Maybe you don't need that. How many psychopaths are traumatized? Well, we know that, people like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam killer, had a horrible traumatic reality and also was involved in all sorts of things, including lots of drug taking. Michael Aquino, zero. No alcohol, no tobacco, no nothing. And limited sexuality. So, he doesn't add up. He does add up that he is a badge-getting fanatic who likes to go against regular society. So when everybody was hippy-dippy, he's getting badges as a Cub Scout. How bizarre. And went from there into, when the military was thought of as the worst thing to go into, he went into it. So he's a contrarianism. He wants to do things contrary to the public. And why is that? And how did he get that from a very alternative mother into art, and I guess a conservative father into investments? He then came out like this. It's very strange. So there's nothing. We have to really understand these things of what the level is. And so eyewitness accounts, particularly from the eyewitnesses that we have here, are not valid. And if you're being questioned and you have to verify your reality, and because you've been traumatized and you know you're 100% right, but how do you get credit for your beliefs? You utter the words, Michael Aquino. Oh, that guy, you must be telling the truth, right? Well, you're going to do it and you're going to rationalize to yourself, stating that, well, who cares? Everyone knows he's a scumbucket child molester. But why don't I name him to give me credibility, because we know he's guilty anyway. So that's what this really comes down to. It's really hard to say, but we could verify this, as I said, by tracking him through. And we do know other people are not really that trackable, but I guess you could. I mean, if you work for a corporation, if you work for, the post office, FedEx, whatever it may be, I mean, they know where you are every day of your life. I don't know if there's some pseudo attendance going on for work, but, you don't show up for work or you're taking time off, everybody in that company is going to know and you're going to get fired. In the military, must have similar problems there. So I don't know if he can pop around wherever he wants to go and nobody knows anything. And where's his reports? Isn't he writing reports and what he's doing at particular times? Well, all of this should be known, etc. As I said, he doesn't talk about anything but making this ghost tape. Doesn't talk about anything else that's considered psychological warfare. Not a single instance of it. So all this stuff, we just don't know. And at this point, it's almost becoming mute, whatever the word is. It's really unimportant. At this point, we've looked into this. The answers can be gained through months and years of hard research, which I am not going to do. This is how it sits. As far as I'm concerned, he's a big, giant maybe. I'm not convinced he was involved in anything. I'm not a fan of so-called personal naming of people unless we can back that up with more information, especially when they have no credibility. In general, people have been sent to the gas chamber who have been pointed at by the finger. He did it, and we found out that he didn't. And they swore in court, and they went to the electric chair in the gas chamber with an eyewitness stating that that was the guy that did it when it didn't do it. I don't believe it. He is the red herring. I don't believe he's been involved in anything. And everybody wants to give him such great power when he didn't have it. He was not a great intellect. He was not very smart. and he was an easy scapegoat, and until we find out differently. But even let's say he did all this stuff that everybody's talking about, where was his commanding officer? What was going on here? What allowed him to do this? And none of the programs that we talk about had anything to do with the fact of him starting them. He contributed to them. He apparently was blocked out of the Stargate programs, which deal with remote viewing and psychic power. He was blocked out of all of that and has a very negative opinion towards that program, saying it's a total waste of money. There is no such thing as psychic power. So all of this he has stated, and he was blocked out of it. Nobody really talks about him. It's interesting that his good friend Colonel Alexander, who's involved in all this Stargate and all the other stuff that he has his foot in, which is everything out there, never mentions Michael Aquino. Yet he was good friends. Of course, everybody's a good friend if you listen to Michael Aquino. But none of these programs has he ever been mentioned in. And I find that interesting on many, many fronts. So what was going on? What did he participate? If he was in some execution programs, he didn't start it. He didn't say, let's go out and kill 90,000 Vietnamese. We'll just go in places and just kill them all. Wasn't his idea. And neither was anything else out there that is one of these horrible programs. MK Ultra, he didn't invent it. He just participated being the PsyOps expert that he claims to be. And I'm sure he was. So he worked with them along with thousands of others. So let's get all that clear and let's understand what's going on here and not totally pin everything on this guy. And now that this guy is dead, we need to find out who is running these programs, what is the core of these programs, and we need to go after the problem. And if we keep pointing to Michael Aquino and everything, we're never going to get any answers. So this should be it for the time being. If something shattering comes up, I will make another report. But as far as I'm concerned, the book on Michael Aquino is shut. I will read his remaining books, give a book review on them, and then that will be it totally. But that ain't, I don't have his books in my reading list to do anytime soon. So I hope you enjoyed this. This is really a complete and thorough investigation. There's not much more to say at this point. Until next time.